Thank you for joining us again on another episode of Get Ready News. I'm Mark Lindsted. This is my brother David Lindsted. And we're going to cover some news stories today in the light of the Bible. But stay tuned. Toward the end of the show, we really want to get into the timeline for the end times and really kind of show exactly what we believe is going to happen here in the near future.
Yes, using the Bible to direct us on how all that works is the key to understanding all this. We're going to look at the world and what they think is happening and how they think everything is coming to an end, and they're all up into arms, just worried about what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we know that from the Bible aspect, or from the Bible's point of view, what prophecy has to say about that, and when the real end of the world is. Not time-wise, but we know the settings and what's happening during these things.
Absolutely. We don't have the exact time, but we know the season, if you will. We kind of know the era that we're going to be in, and we can look forward to what's going to happen. And we can see that the world has no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to understand. We're looking basically at a worldview from a world aspect, and we're looking at a worldview from a biblical aspect.
Exactly. And the first thing we have is our story here. The world is really worried about this heat belt that's developing in America. And this article behind me says there's 100 million Americans by the year 2053 will be in areas that will reach 125 degrees.
Wow. Well, when you say heat belt, I thought maybe my belt was getting too warm because it's getting too big. I'm not real sure. But 100 million Americans will be in an extreme heat belt. Do people really know what extreme heat is?
I don't know. I got my phone and I open it up, the little app on there, and it tells me heat advisory. And it says 91 degrees heat advisory. And I thought, that is like just normal temperatures for Kansas in the summer. In fact, when I was a kid, I remember it being over 100 degrees all the time.
Yeah.
It may not go over 105 much, but it was pretty hot.
I remember it being over 100 for consecutive days, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. As a kid, you never thought about it. You were out running around, drinking from the garden hose, having a good time. But I think that what we're looking at here is a soft world produces soft people. We've had so much air conditioning and so much at our fingertips to change things and to make us so more sensitive.
Yeah.
Like I can remember, I go in my house now and I keep it down to 74, 75, and it's like walking into an ice box, and I love it. But now I go outside and it's 88, and I said, oh, it's so hot out here.
It reminds me, we went when we were younger, we went to a camp in Minnesota, and they were going to have a soccer tournament. And they canceled the tournament because of heat. And it was 80 degrees.
Well, and what really makes a big difference on temperature, I'm going to tell you, is the wind.
Yeah.
I remember that same camp, they talked about it being so cold in the morning. It's going to be freezing cold in the morning. And I got up and I was wearing a T-shirt and shorts because they have so many trees. There was no wind.
Yep.
It's not like here in Kansas when they say it's 32 degrees outside. You walk outside, there's a 90-mile-an-hour wind plowing through you too.
That's for sure. And I think a lot of what temperatures feel like and what they are depends on where you live.
Certainly.
We went to Myanmar.
Yeah.
And we were there for a couple of weeks visiting our cousin and her husband has a school over there.
Yeah.
And we got off the airplane and we were wearing shorts and T-shirts, and this was their winter time. So it was like 75 degrees and people were wearing coats and gloves and hats.
Well, even during the day, I remember the temperature getting up to about 90 anyway during the winter.
Yep.
And the kids in the school were wearing hoodies and long pants, and I'm wearing as little as I can because I'm sweating like I always do. What an interesting thing, but perception is different. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the things that I find interesting was we're talking about this extreme heat and all these things, and back in 1936, we had what I would call a real heat wave. So here is a picture you can see behind us of all the various temperatures around the United States during this time, and most everything is over 100 degrees.
Now wait a minute. This has never happened before.
That's right. This is a new phenomenon, right? We're headed to outstanding global warming of some sort. But I want you to look at this map. When you see the red numbers, that doesn't mean the entire state was suffering at that temperature, but that was the highest temperature reported in that state at any point.
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of contention with data.
Oh, data is easy to manipulate.
And it really is. It's so easy to see how you could make any data say what you want it to say.
For example, our next slide. Here you can see that we start at 1975 and go up to the year 2025.
Man, look at that thing. It's raised up there like crazy. We're going to be melted off the earth.
I tell you what, I don't know that I want to live in 2025 if it's going to be this hot.
I'm glad I'm old.
I'm old and almost done.
But I mean, this graph, looks really extreme. I'm not sure what happened there in 1999. We had a little spike there in 1999. We better figure that out too. Yep. Seems to be right up there almost where we're at now.
Now, if you pay attention to this slide, you'll notice that scale matters. On the left-hand side, you're going to see that this is 1 degree Celsius. The difference is only 1 degree.
So we've gone a little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit.
So my next question is well, where's 1936 on this?
That would be good to know.
It would be interesting to see.
Why they decide to start in 1975.
My next thing is, if we think, and we not being me and you, but the world thinks that we've been here billions of years, we only have enough data for the last several hundred years, at best.
Yeah.
How do we know what the temperature has been throughout that whole time?
Yeah. That's a great question.
It's an impossible thing. We don't know if we're in a hot swing or not.
Well, and that's what I've always asked about carbon-14 dating. They sample the same rock and it comes back 2 different dates.
Oh, yeah.
We also don't know what happens to carbon after 100 years or so. We don't know if it breaks down faster. We don't know any of that. So we're guessing, really, when we use things like carbon-14 dating.
Absolutely.
And the reason I say that I don't trust any of the data is I remember reading this article. This is from, I believe, an Ohio paper. And it talked about that most of the data is corrupt data. Most of the data is corrupt data. In fact, it says that the NOAA, or NOAA, by the way, a federal agency that gives all this stuff to as this article calls it, the weather babes and studs to give out. And it says that the research discovered 96% of the stations that are reporting flawed data because the sensors are adjacent to heat-producing or heat-trapping structures or in zones and cities where they shouldn't be in suburbia. And in fact, I think I remember they even had some of these things set out on the tarmac.
Yep. I worked at the airport, and I'm going to tell you something. The tarmac is very hot or very cold.
Well, and that's the way it is. Like I have a son who plays baseball, and when he says turf fields look nice, the grass is always there, there's no mud, but they're so hot, they radiate heat. And this is the place that they're collecting collections of temperatures to tell us we're warming.
I worked at a heating and air company for a long time doing programming and controls works. And it was amazing to me how many times we got a call that a room was too cold and the secretary had to have a heater under her desk to keep her warm, only to find out that the heater was right below the thermostat. So as she turned the heat up, the heat would go up and hit the thermostat and make the thermostat think it's hot in the room, would turn the air conditioner on even more.
Wow. Well, I think that we can see that there's a lot of corrupt data, there's a lot of manipulation of the data to say what you want it to say, because the government doesn't fund your project unless you're agreeing with the government.
That's right, and I think it's coming down to where we're trying to scare people. Here's the next one: extreme weather, and this is, I thought, man, it covers Japan, which just had a typhoon go through, and major destruction up there. But if you look at the article on the top left, there's a guy there that's panicking about rain in his basement apartment. Now, there's not been any big rain in New York where this has happened. It's just anytime it rains, the water comes into his building.
So wait a minute. They dug a basement down, and the water's coming into his building.
Yes.
So is that weather, or is that poor weatherproofing?
Poor weatherproofing, poor construction, pour anything. But they're trying to cause a panic.
A fear, yeah.
The other article up here says, a hyper-violent typhoon.
Wow. Do we classify crimes this way also? A hyper-violent protester.
That's right. I think you'd be run out of the room for saying hyper-violent protester. But it could have a hyper-violent storm. The storm itself is more violent because it has personality.
Well, we rate funnel clouds and tornadoes, on an F scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, F5, F6 being crazy, big, violent storms. But it's just an intense storm. I don't know that you call it hyper-violent. You say you're acting out of the norm.
Now, the next slide we have is probably something that we could gauge for the end times. But this is every place in the world where there's some type of conflict, some type of either a war or just little skirmishes here or there or something major.
Civil war, tribal fighting, major war, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Hamas, Lebanon,
everything.
Iran.
It doesn't matter. You can even see there's stuff there in Mexico, and it has to do with cartels and some other stuff. And so this is probably more.
How come Chicago doesn't show up?
That's a very good question. I think they're just about the murder capital of America right now.
I can't remember if it was them or D.C., one of the two.
One of the two.
But you'd think that there might show up a little red dot there, that there's an armed conflict in Chicago. That mean Detroit. I mean, come on, think about this. How many murders happen every weekend in those places?
It's amazing. I think this holiday weekend that's coming up, we'll probably find a mass amount. I think last holiday we had like 40 or 50, at least shootings, if not killings.
Yeah, wow. So, we could say that this is rumors of wars, and really it gives a sign for the end times.
Right.
But I don't think that this weather is. I don't think that this weather is any different than it's ever been. And I really blame a lot of this on what I call the 24-hour news cycle. You got to have news, you got to have news, you got to have news. 100 years ago, they didn't report that China had a hurricane.
No.
You might see it in the newspaper a week later that there were some people killed by a weather thing, but now that we get 24-hour news channels, they're looking every instance. Oh, look, there's an inch of rain in Arizona, and it's going to flood the desert.
I remember the last time I watched one for a hurricane coming into the United States, and they spent hours talking about nothing.
And it never showed up.
And a week later, it finally made it to the coast, and it's like...
And it was rain.
Yeah.
It didn't do any real damage or anything, but they kept preparing you for a week that you're going to die.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Well, as we look at these things and as we see the idea of the travail or the signs of the end times, we really want to go and I want to switch our set around. I want to get to where we can stand up. I want to put a big chart on this screen and kind of show you where we think the end of time is. Yeah. Because I don't think that it's going to be perished. I don't think the end of time is coming from the world itself.
No.
I think it's coming from God.
Absolutely.
God has said this will last until the end of time. So we're going to pause for just a quick second. It won't look like much to you because you'll just see a blip in and out on the screen. We're going to change our set, and we're going to go over a chart talking about the end time. Well, thanks for tuning in and staying with us as we change our set. I know for us it took a few minutes, but for you it was no time at all. But you can see we have this wonderful chart here. And we'll put it on the screen several times as we're talking right now. But we wanted you to see a few things we think about the end of time biblical worldview. And we started talking about all the things that are happening, and the weather's crazy, and the wars and rumors of wars. And what verse is that again? That's in Matthew, right?
Matthew 24, verse 6. It says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows."
So this is the beginning of something happening.
Right.
But interestingly enough, there's something not mentioned here.
Yeah, I see a very glaring detail that's missing that man has inserted, and it's called weather
change.
Climate change. There you go.
Well, if you go back all the years, I remember there was always something. It was when my day, when I was a kid, it was acid rain. I think they were saying we got to tax you for this, and then it was the ozone layer, and then oil and all this. So we see man is inserting things into what could be the end of the world that don't really belong there biblically.
Exactly. And I think it's more of a factor of fear than they actually think the end of the world's coming.
Yeah.
I think this is a goal for them to make money, to control, to do whatever they want to do with their own agendas.
Sure. Well, we see that famines, and we do have famines now. I don't want us all to be deceived that there is not famine. There is famine right now in several places. There are earthquakes.
Yeah.
And there are earthquakes happening in different places. I will say yes, that's true, because I live in Kansas and I don't remember earthquakes when I was a kid, and we do have tremors now.
Yeah, but we are also on the fault line, Missouri fault line. So it's not uncommon, but still we are having more today than
we do see an elevation of this happen. You know, interestingly enough, some of the other things that are associated with the end days or the latter days, we also see happening right now. If you turn to 2 Timothy chapter 3, we can see, it says, "This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves. They'll be covetous, boasters, proud." We just have whole months of pride now. "Blasphemers." During the pride month, they blaspheme on top. And we see they'll be disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. Boy, I tell you, I can't think of a time other than right now where this is really at a peak. It says they'll have no form of godliness, they'll have a form of godliness, but deny the power thereof, saying that they'll look like godly men, but they won't really worship God. They won't be of God. And we can certainly see that in some of these big cult-type leaders right now, can't we?
And I think that's a key. You know, one of the things that I've been asked over my days has been, well, we've always had earthquakes, and we've always had pestilences, and we've always had these things. But everything is coming together at one time. Now you see the scripture you just read is being fulfilled right now.
Yeah.
This scripture that I read earlier is being fulfilled right now.
Yeah.
We see that all these things are coming together. The state of Israel is now a state.
Yeah.
Now remember, until 1948, since 70 AD, there was no temple, there was no Jerusalem, there was no people living out. That was all controlled by other people. And so now we see them back in the land. We see these things coming up. We see the things that you're talking about coming up, and we're seeing all these things are coming to a head right in this area right here.
Yeah. And as we look at this chart, we're going to say this is, the basically kind of creation in a way. We're starting here. We're coming forward. We have the death of Christ, and then we have entered what we're in right now. We think is called the church age, or the age of grace, right here in this timeline. And really, what we have here is the time that God has said, "I'm going to give you time to get to know my Son." To make a change in your life, to say, "I believe in Jesus Christ as my Savior. I'm going to turn from my sin, and I'm going to follow Him." That's what this whole time is about right here.
If we look up here, we see Israel is in a spirit of slumber. They are in denial that any of this happened. And this is a time for the church to make them jealous and want to come back to God.
Yeah. Well, the next thing we think that's going to happen, especially if we look at this chart, is the rapture of the church. And I think it's a perfect thing to understand here that this rapture, I think, does take place. I think scripturally it proves that the rapture takes place before the tribulation begins. This middle portion here in this chart is talking about the tribulation period. And I think we're set now more than ever for that.
Yeah, it says in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4, all the way down to verse 7, it says, "Let no man deceive you, that by any means that they shall not come, except there be a falling away first, and then the man of sin is revealed." So the Antichrist is revealed.
Now, do you think the falling away is the rapture, or do you think the falling away is those that are falling away from truth?
I think it's the rapture, because in verse 7, it says, "For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he was taken away." So that means that the person, the one that hinders sin and hinders this from being done is taken out of here. And that person is in the church.
Sure.
And he would be removed.
That's the Comforter. That's the
He's
Holy Spirit.
So in order for him to be removed in that capacity, I think it has to remove the church. And then it says, and then the wicked shall be revealed. So here we have in verse 7, repeating what's happening in verse 3 and giving us a little more clues on that.
See, I always thought the falling away was the apostate church.
Yep, I've heard that too, and I don't agree with that. I think that it doesn't say in here that there's a church that's apostate. It just says the word apostasy is in there, and our minds automatically think apostasy means leaving the church.
Interesting. So we think that we'll go through this age of grace. I think if you look at the timeline, I think we're like right here.
Yeah.
Why do I think that? Well, I think that for many reasons. First of all, being we see the travail or the signs of the times. We see the wars, the rumors of wars. We see the pestilence. We see the earthquakes. We also see that the state of man, like in 2 Timothy, is exactly where it needs to be. But not only that, there are other things that are coming to play here. We look at the fact that Israel is longing for the third temple and to begin sacrifice. And we know that in Daniel, it talks about the sacrifice, and it says in Daniel 9:27 that the sacrifice will stop at the midpoint of the tribulation. At 3.5 years, it will stop. So for something to stop, it has to begin.
Right.
If it stops in the middle, then it starts 3.5 years before. So we're looking at a country, the country Israel, who is ready to build a third temple. They have all the instruments together to do so. At this exact time, they have the red heifers needed to sacrifice, to cleanse the Temple Mount, to cleanse the priesthood. I was just there in July. We visited them. I got to see them with my own eyes. And not only that, now we have our friend Jim Barfield, who's showing us in the Copper Scroll where Solomon's gold might be.
Right.
And where the tabernacle of Moses is. And you want to,
the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant. I mean, all the things needed. So not only are we seeing a convergence of the times of mankind's actions as well as the way the earth is, we're also seeing a convergence of things needed to begin a sacrifice. And for that, now don't get me wrong, I don't need a third temple.
Right.
I don't need that at all. I have Jesus. But this is a sign to me of something coming.
The other thing we see coming into this era, what else has to happen in this is we are going to have the image of the beast, which we think could be an AI, it could be a robot, it could be something. We see that it says that the two witnesses that are out proclaiming Christ die, and the whole world sees this.
Yeah.
What is it something that the whole world has now? Cell phones.
My cell phone.
So we know we're getting closer to here because we have the technology to do this.
Yeah, because before you couldn't get news around without having a Pony Express and across the ocean on a boat. And
we have some friends that are missionaries in Africa, and some of those little cities, they have a well.
Yeah.
And a generator, and you come up there, and what's plugged? All their phones are plugged in, and for the well. So.
And then, of course, when the tribulation starts, I mean, really, we see some really horrible times for mankind. I think the first death period is a quarter of the population.
Yep.
So let's say that there's 8 billion people. That means 2 billion people are going to die.
Yeah.
And then is it the sixth
seal, which would be close to the midpoint? There's another 1/3.
1/3 of the remaining. So 3.5 billion people die in 3.5 years.
Yes. Everybody would like, I've always heard people say this is the peaceful area, but I don't think there's any peace here. All these people that are dying, all these things that are coming on, maybe right here at the very sliver, at the beginning, people will think the Antichrist brings salvation.
Well, they talk about the Gog-Magog wars, and Israel will be at peace, but just because Israel's at peace doesn't mean the entire world will be at peace. So we can see that all could happen right here. We could see the first Gog-Magog war somewhere in here.
Yep.
We see Armageddon happening right after the tribulation, right after the marriage of the Lamb goes for your honeymoon, and then you have the marriage supper of the Lamb with the Armageddon, and then you have the millennial kingdom right here. And then the second Gog-Magog war comes right here at the end.
Yep.
And right at the end, what happens after that?
After that, Satan and his angels are cast into the lake of fire, and all those people that, in fact, all people will come up here to the great white throne. Those that have accepted Christ will have Jesus as their mediator.
Yes.
And they will not be tried here. But those that have not will be sent down to the lake of
So
fire.
these
with
are
the
those
devil
that'll be judged for what they did,
for what they did.
their good or bad works,
Yep.
versus the believers will be judged for the good works they did and whether they did them for the right reason.
Exactly.
But not to lose salvation,
Not
but to
to lose
gain
salvation.
crowns.
Correct.
And then they cast those who don't believe in the lake of fire for eternity with the devil and the beast, and all those are done forever. And then we see the earth is tried by fire instead of water. And it's the new heaven and the new earth. And one of my favorite verses is Revelation chapter 21, verse 3. It says, "New heaven and a new earth, and the tabernacle of God is with men, and he himself will be their God, and they will be his people." So that's a brief description of this chart. If you enjoyed this type of a session, let us know, because I'd be happy to use this wonderful big LED screen one of our donors helped us out with, to put more charts up here, and maybe even take the entire time to really explain chronologically what should happen in the end times, or even chronologically what happened from the beginning.
Exactly. And there's many of these charts and many of these things that we can bring forward and explain how things work. And we are open to comments and questions. If you would like to ask a question in the comments, we'd be more than happy to answer you.
In fact, I'm working on a chart right now that I'll use on this screen for the first and second Gog and Magog wars. I want people to really understand that there's more than one. The first one, I believe, Rosh is the Gog, or the leader of Russia.
Right.
And the second one, I don't know who's going to be the leader of that one. Gog is just a title like president or general.
We know that Satan will be involved in that directly.
Yeah. And you know, as we look at our rapture of the church and we're up here at the judgment seat of Christ, and then we come over to the marriage supper of the Lamb, what a beautiful picture of a Jewish wedding. And this is one of the main reasons I believe in the pre-trib rapture.
I agree with that. And that may be a good thing to go over, is that wedding and how that correlates, because God makes so many pictures so that we can take and put images in our mind of what's going to happen.
One of my favorite things to discuss is the tabernacle. I'm making a video series right now for one of our partners, Southwest Radio Church, on the tabernacle and what it means, and all the pictures and symbolism and the numbers and everything in that tabernacle point to Christ, point to our position in Christ, point to how salvation comes. It's so amazing to see. So I think we'll plan on doing a few more of these, and we'd love to hear from you if this is what you'd like to see happen. My name is Mark, of course, and if you look at my email, it's mark@getreadynews.com. And David, is yours Dave or David?
Dave.
Dave. So Dave, D-A-V-E, @getreadynews.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.